So one thing that I want to do, as I indicated on Twitter a couple weeks ago, is to make some videos in between other projects I want to do here, elucidating, clarifying, and just throwing additional light on some underlying definitions on philosophical or theological terms that I use oftentimes on this channel and on Twitter. That may cause some confusion or unnecessary difficulty for some of the people who are maybe a bit less initiated in the kinds of subjects that I discuss regularly on this channel. I often get comments objecting that the terminology or the phraseology of some or even much of my content is a bit too abstract or left unexplained, and for that reason doesn't exactly provide as much edification as perhaps it otherwise would. Now, what I don't want to do with this channel is just to turn it into another Pints with Aquinas, but just with lower production quality, as I do think that a great many of you appreciate the greater depth that I do try to provide for these difficult topics. But what I do want to do is to make additional content like this, where the terms that I will continue to use in future videos are just given their due time to break down and explain with better clarity and precision, so that my other videos can be more edifying for more people. So with that said, the term that I kind of want to spend some time defining and clarifying through the lens of Thomistic philosophy in this video would be perfection. Now, this is obviously not on its face a very highfalutin term. It's clearly used in everyday language, and I think has an easily recognizable colloquial meaning that is not altogether equivocal in relation to the Thomistic conception of the term. But when I use this term within the context of the videos that I do, I'm using it in a manner that is very much attached to multiple metaphysical considerations that may not be intuitively obvious to the uninitiated. So I do want to devote some time to this. So with all other terms that I want to address in this series of sorts, I'm going to start off with the working definition and then go from there. And I'm usually going to be deriving these definitions from the book that I reference oftentimes on this channel, which is Bernard Wellner's Dictionary of Scholastic Philosophy. So on perfection, Wellner defines it as such: as an adjective, quote, complete or whole, excellent, fully in act, having all of the actual qualities and good attributes that are requisite to its nature or kind, that which has attained its proper end, that which is without defect, unquote. As a noun, quote, any good possessed by a being, some definite actuality, reality, or good belonging to a being, suitable to it, and conceived as really or mentally distinct from other perfections present to that being, unquote. So what's important to recognize about these definitions is that perfection is always tied to actuality. That is to say, the metaphysical basis upon which we discern anything as more or less perfect is the degree to which a thing is more or less actual. Thus, while perfection, no doubt, has attached to it a colloquial mode of expression, in its metaphysically robust sense, it presupposes deeper philosophical principles that provide a much richer depth of intelligibility to the term. And this should be considered whenever the term is used in scholastic philosophy. Thus, when we say, for example, that form and matter are compared as the perfect is to the imperfect, this should now make a bit more sense, because form is the principle whereby a thing receives its intelligible structure or identity, which makes the thing to be the very type of thing that it is. And matter is the principle whereby that intelligible structure or identity is received and multiplied and thereby individuated. So when discerning the relationship between form and matter through this prism of perfection, it becomes a bit more graspable why form would be called, in a purely objective sense, more perfect than matter. Additionally, when I in my videos claim that something is perfective of another, or that some activity is perfective, this means that I am considering something or phenomenon from the standpoint of some bestowal of actuality upon that which stands in potency with respect to what bestows that actuality. So this is to say that because goodness is determined by a thing being more or less actual according to its nature, something can only be truly perfective of another if it has within it the capacity to bestow upon another thing a greater participation in the actuality owing to its very nature. So just to give a few examples that I think will help clarify those abstractions a bit. When we say that the sun is perfective of the plant, what we are saying is that the sun has within itself the capacity to raise the plant to a greater participation in its own actuality as determined by what its nature demands for some aspect of its own fulfillment, in this case, nourishment. The plant therefore stands in relation to the sun as potency does to act, and once the plant receives the actualizing principle whereby the plant is nourished, that plant is thereby perfected in some real way inherent in the plant itself. So as you can see, that this metaphysically robust notion of perfection requires us to see perfection not as a useful fiction of the mind, but that it has its ontological origin as rooted in concrete reality, in things that we can directly encounter. Now, I think you can also begin to see that what import this metaphysically robust definition of perfection has even for moral theory, rooted in natural law. If the very notion of perfection is already bound up within the very principles that constitute the deepest layers of reality, namely act and potency, then it would be absurd to locate the source of human morality in anything other than our very natures. This is because the source of perfection in things is actuality. And the primary principle of perfective actuality in things would be their very natures. After all, what in the order of being is more fundamental to existing things than that which accounts for the very source of that thing's identity and perfective activities? That would be the nature. The nature is the source of a thing's perfective inclinations, the source of a thing's intelligible structure and identity as inclined towards its very ends. We're going to have to do a video on the definition of nature. I mean, that's obviously very multifaceted and just gravely misconstrued in today's language. So we're definitely going to have to devote a whole video on that alone. But this metaphysically robust concept of perfection, this is just one of the many examples where a simple term that has wide throwaway colloquial usage actually has an immensely rich philosophical pedigree in ancient and medieval philosophy. So I do hope that this was helpful. I plan on doing these pretty regularly in conjunction with the other topics that I had said I want to cover just in general. So if you like the video, give it a like, give it a thumbs up, comment, sign up for my Patreon if you're interested. I have a link to that in the description of this video, and I should be continuing to regularly and semi-regularly upload content in the near future. So thank you. God bless.